Greetings, sports fans. Welcome back to Quarantine Central. We're here today to talk about sync licensing. Isn't that fascinating? The use of music in visual productions? I think it is. It's one of the most exciting parts of the business and creative parts of the publishing business to work in. So, um, sync licensing, traditionally speaking, is about uh, a publisher giving rights to somebody who's making a production and then putting music into it. There's an additional use of music in these productions that's not technically sync licensing, and that's what I'd like to talk about first. And that's the creation of original music for these productions, commissioning music. And there's no publisher, generally speaking, involved in that transaction. It is the people that are producing that production who commission someone to create music, like background music scores for movies, TV, video games, commercials, whatever it might be. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that first because that's really important stuff. And some people are crazy about the soundtracks, the background scores to these productions. If you go on message boards and you see the people that collect them and rate them and all sorts of stuff like that. Now there are some films that don't contain much background music at all. There's two really notable productions. And what's interesting about background music is that you don't really notice it, even though it's alien to the real world. I mean, there's not music playing as a background score to your life. Well, there is in my head, but there shouldn't be. And but you see it in a movie and you just accept it, and it really accentuates the movie and can make something more dramatic, can make something more exciting, can make something sexier, can have all sorts of effects. But the lack of music can do that too because it's just so jarring. Your brain is used to consuming that background score, and when it's not there, it can be very disturbing. And the two films where there's virtually no music in the background uh, that I can think of, it's very disturbing. And that's The Birds. Have you seen that movie, The Birds? Alfred Hitchcock? No music. There's just bird noises that are kind of created mechanically. But it is just the silence. If this were a class, I'd show you a little clip. You should go take a little clip of the birds attacking the kids in a schoolyard. It's absolutely scary. And then the other one is No Country for Old Men, which of course has again, lack of music, and it adds to the sinister quality of what's going on. Go watch a scene from that movie. Watch the scene where that guy, the bad guy, whatever his name is, goes into the gas station. Wow. Wow, wow. I'm going to watch it right after I'm done with this. So how does that music get created? What is the process? I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about it. Generally, instead of publishers being involved, there are agencies involved, talent agencies that represent these composers from the very large multi-purpose agencies like Creative Artists Agency and William Morris Endeavor. They represent a lot of the significant composers out there. And then there are specialty agencies, that is, agencies that purely represent composers for this purpose. Agencies like Gorfaine Schwartz and Kraft Engel, and in England, Hot House Music. So those they represent, and when somebody's going to do a production, they contact the agency specifically for an individual that they represent, or just put on the table that they have this production going on and look for recommendations from these agencies' rosters for who might participate in them. And we know some of the stars of soundtrack or background score creation. There is, I have a list of them in your outline, which I hope you have in front of you. Just some notable ones. You might have your favorites that are not on that list, but I'm going to ask you to do a little research and tell me what productions, significant productions they worked on. So, for instance, James Horner, you should look him up and see what he's done. I don't know. You can look near, far, and I don't know if you'll find what he's worked on. Howard Shore, who worked on the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is the most overrated series of films in movie history. Ooh, I'm going to get some pushback on that. Danny Elfman, go look up what he's done. He used to be in a band called Oingo Boingo before he got involved in background music scores. John Williams, I can't remember. You might have trouble finding what he's worked on. Him and Hans Zimmer. You should look, Hans Zimmer, you know those ads for those master classes that you see all over your Facebook feed and elsewhere. Just watch the preview of the one with Hans Zimmer about soundtrack creation. It's really interesting. Mike Post, who did a lot of the really famous TV show background scores. Jan Hammer, who actually had a number one hit with his theme song to a television show, an instrumental, which is rare, and then coming from a TV show, double rare. Look him up. Jeff Beal, who I read an interesting article about him and how he talked about how it's different creating that music, background music score for TV shows when those TV shows are designed or now are being consumed by binge watching. It changes the way composers think about how that score should be, whether it's getting too repetitive, maybe whether they need to change it. And I was just having this discussion with my son yesterday, not about background music scores, but about how binge watching something is a different experience from watching it on a weekly basis. And I heard somebody on a podcast, because that's all I do is listen to podcasts, talk about how different it is, like watching The Office, the most overrated TV show in TV history. Come on, push back on that one. I'm watching Community now. Oh, it's tons the better show. Anyway, how if you binge watch The Office, Pam, is that her name? Pam is annoying if you're watching her episode after episode after episode. But if you saw it on a weekly basis, you maybe wouldn't be as annoying. So just think about the differences in all respects about how you consume things changes the way you feel about a production. Anyway, Jeff Beal, Peter Breder. Can't wait to see you look that one up. Peter Breder. So what are the terms of the deal once somebody's decided to be engaged for this purpose? Is they're going to have a contract that's going to spell out what the nature of that deal is. Number one, it's going to be a work made for hire. And that's why there's no publisher involved, is because the person who's commissioning the work needs to own it, needs to own the whole thing, and they need to own it forever and ever without any chance of there being any termination rights or any way that somebody could rip this song out of the production, which would necessitate having to go either pay them an exorbitant amount, whatever they want, to put it back in, or to go in and put new music in there. So that's too unwieldy, and so it needs to be a work made for hire. And luckily, and because of the lobbying of the movie production industry, it is specifically in the statute that when you commission somebody to make something, and you have it in writing that it's work made for hire, and it's something that goes into a motion picture or other audiovisual work, it qualifies as a work made for hire. Yeah, there's a little copyright review for you. So the contract is going to spell out all the services that this composer is going to perform. They can perform some or all of these. Obviously, compose is one of them, but they could be the ones that arrange it for an orchestra, because quite often it's orchestrated. Conduct, they conduct too, maybe, and they may even be involved in the production of that soundtrack, especially today when these things can be sort of self-contained. So it's going to spell out and gauge how much you're going to pay them by virtue of how many of these services they're performing. It's going to have a start and end date, which is really, really important for both parties. From the composer's point of view, they make money by scheduling this work, and they need to know each production, when it starts and when it ends, so they can line up multiple kind of jobs that they're going to perform. So very, very important for them. From the movie or TV shows or whatever's point of view, they need to know that this music is going to be started and completed as of a specific date, because they have release dates for movies, they have a broadcast schedule for television shows, they have ad campaigns for ads, and so it's really important that they have a deadline in there that music must be delivered by. And there's almost nothing as stressful as working in the music portion of some of these productions, because it is the thing that is done last by necessity. That is, the movie has to be shot, the movie has to be edited, and all that it needs to be done before you can know exactly what music goes where. So it's very stressful. It's the last thing that happens. You're on a deadline. The movie's on a deadline. So very stressful. It's going to say approximately how much music is going to be required, and then it's going to contain a fee, obviously, how much you're going to get paid based on all those factors, and the stature of who you are. So for film I don't even know why I give these ranges. They're so large, but if you're working on an indie film or something, it could be as little as $10,000 for a major motion picture score by one of these superstars that I have listed above. It could be $1 million or more. For TV, generally speaking, it's maybe somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000 per half hour. Double that if you're working, obviously, on an hour-long television show. And for commercials, maybe $5,000 to $50,000. Again, depending, is it a local, regional, national, international ad, big product, small product, whatever it might be. So these are just ranges. Obviously, they can be less or more. That's why I hate to give these ranges. As a matter of fact, I just read the other day, the Simpsons music guy was fired, and he's alleging he was fired for being too old. And he'd been working there for like 27 years, and they're claiming they fired him because he wasn't familiar with the kind of music they were starting to do. They did a hip-hop episode or something like that. And they claimed he was farming out the job to his kids. So, and in the article it said he made $12,000 an episode. So I guess, it could be more than 10. So yeah, there you go. There you go. All right. Those are just the fees that would be involved if they are actually doing the production of the score themselves. This may be done as a package deal where the recording costs are included. So maybe it would be $15,000 per half hour episode, but they're actually producing that music. If somebody's being commissioned to do a single for a motion picture, it could be as little as $10,000 for an indie, up to a few $100,000. So that, I don't know if this was the case or it was a pre-existing song. I don't even know what the song is. I don't even know what the movie is. What the hell am I talking about? The Fast and Furious movie where a dude dies and there's a song by somebody. Who is it? See You Again? Is that it? Who does that song? I can't remember. Anyway, if that were commissioned, you might give that artist a couple of $100,000 to do that. And that probably would be a package deal where the recording costs are included, the fees for writing, etc. Please keep in mind that if you are doing something like this, you got to have in that contract, you have to have a publishing agreement as part of that agreement. If you do work made for hire and you did background music score for, I don't want to give that away. If you did background music score for Titanic and it said this is a work made for hire and we're paying you $1 million to do this, and that's all the agreement said, that would be the end of your money. No more. That you're being paid $1 million, it's work made for hire, goodbye. What you need to do is have a publishing agreement attached to that, and you should be able to do that. There are some production houses who hire people to do music for their little music library that don't do this, but this is the way it should be if you're doing a score. And that is a publishing agreement so that if it generates any further income, which it naturally will, how will it? If I do the soundtrack for Titanic, what kind of royalties should be earned by the writer of that background music score? Well, it should be that they're going to get performance royalties whenever it's played in movie theaters outside of the United States. They're going to get paid performance royalties whenever that movie is on television. They're going to get paid every time a soundtrack record is sold. Do you know how many records Titanic sold, soundtrack? Over 10 million here in the United States alone. So it's altogether possible that it's going to generate a lot more money. So you have to have a publishing agreement attached, and it will be a full publishing agreement. There are people that maybe if you do a song for a motion picture, maybe you can get co-publishing. That's rare. It could be that you maintain all your publishing. That would be very rare. Okay, so mostly the production company wants complete and total control and ownership of that. All right, so that's newly commissioned music, works made for hire. In synchronization income, we have that same paradigm that we've had for every type of licensing, where there's a licensor, there's a licensee, there's some rights that go this way, there's a fee that goes this way, and there are some third parties that are involved. So keep that in mind as I go over these variables, because I'm going to ask you to map that out for me when we're done. So For existing music, using existing music, a production company going and soliciting a publisher and trying to get to incorporate some music in there. For movies, very, very lucrative part of this business. Generally speaking, movies' budget for music, including the background music score, is going to be somewhere between 1 to 5% of the total budget for the motion picture. So if you're seeing something that's $100 million to produce, they might spend $5 million on it. So that's just a range. Again, it can be less. Obviously, in the case of No Country for Old Men or The Birds, it's less than 1%. For some movies, it's greater than 5% because of the enormous amount of music that's used or the importance of the music that's being used. So two notable examples I can think of is Moulin Rouge, which uses lots and lots of really, really valuable copyrights from Elton John to the Beatles, etc. That's going to be probably more than 5% of that movie's budget, as well as something like Across the Universe, which is a movie that's based upon the stringing together of a bunch of different Beatles songs. For that movie, the publishers were paid in advance of $6 million and then got a percentage of the movie's gross. So tons and more than 5% of that movie's budget obviously went to the use of music. The licensee is going to be the film production company, and there are going to be layers of people that are involved in the decision making for this, from the producer, who is overseeing the entire thing and has to give their okay to everything, to the director, who's obviously in charge of putting it together from a creative point of view, to the music supervisor, who is a person who is specifically designated to go out and look for music. So that's the title of a person who works in a movie production, who is in charge of going out and getting music. So the director will say, hey, listen, this is the movie, and this is where I think some songs could be used, and this is the type of song I'm looking for. Go out and get me some choices. And they're going to send out the word. They send out to publishers, all of these people, movies, TV, commercials, etc. They send out what's known as a brief, which is the same as those tip sheets we saw in mechanical rights licensing, where it says the movie production, what sort of songs they're looking for, who to send it to, maybe the budget, all sorts of key information. They're going to send that out to the publishing world. There's also, if you're a publisher, there's a level of IMDb that you can subscribe to, pay IMDb, that has a list of productions and the music they're looking for. So there's essentially the same type of information as in mechanical licensing. So the music supervisor, which is the best job in the whole entire world. The only problem is that you're working from production to production. So you got to keep those jobs coming in. And right now, if you're a music supervisor, even if you're the best music supervisor in the world, there's no production going on. You ain't got no kind of money. So the most famous music supervisor in history is Alexandra Patsavas. You should look her up. She's in charge of music for some significant productions that are significant not just for the production themselves, but also for their use of music. Things like the Twilight movie series, which you can like or not like. You could be Team Jacob or Team Edward. No matter how you feel about any of that, the music is really, really good. The music choices for that movie. She also did Gilmore Girls, Grey's Anatomy, all of the productions that are famous for their use of music. She's the one that's done it. She's so good at it that she's got her own record label under Atlantic Records called Chop Shop Records. And Chop Shop is the name of her music supervision company as well. So, Alexandra Patsavas, you should get to know her. There's somebody here in town, Katie Jellin, who works at Warner Chappell. She used to work for her way back in the day. So there's a connection if you want to get into music supervision. There you go. The music supervisor is the person who works and is employed by that production. Sometimes that person, like in the case of Alexandra Patsavas, she's got her own company, music supervision company. So that might be what you think of as the third party who's involved in this licensing. That is, we know that in mechanical licensing, there's the Harry Fox Agency. In performance rights licensing, there's ASCAP, and BMI, and CSAC, and GMR. And in this case, there are entities that help out either on the creative side and or on the business side to help with this transaction. That is, you can hire a music supervision company rather than having them be part of that movie crew, and they will aid you in going out and selecting those songs. There are also companies that are specifically organized to help with the clearing of those songs. They're called clearance houses. Clearing means somebody's getting and securing and making sure you have rights to something. So you say, did you get that song cleared? There was a controversy with the Ellen DeGeneres show. Remember how she comes out and she dances in every episode at the beat? Whoa, the computer didn't like me doing that. She dances. This is her dancing. I dance better than this. I'm just imitating her. They never got any rights to any of that music. They said they didn't know. Nobody cleared the music, so they got in big trouble and had to pay off publishers. So that's the technical term for making sure you've secured rights. And there are companies that exist out there. So you collect all this music you want to use and you say, I don't feel like going out and finding these publishers and negotiating these licenses and clearing this stuff. You hire a clearinghouse to take care of the business aspects of this. The same way you hire Harry Fox to take care of something. So they really aid on the part of the user, the licensee, rather than the licensor. So those are the third parties. Now, at the very least, you need the rights to synchronize. That's what the little 2-page synchronization agreement will say. It's only a 2-page document, honestly. It says you have the right to synchronize this composition in timed relation with this audiovisual production. You need more than that, more than just the sync. You're going to need to make use this production in some way. So if it's a movie, you're going to have the rights to exhibit that motion picture. And so you're going to get a domestic theatrical performance license as part of that sync license, as I explained in the performance rights licensing thing, is that it's going to say, hey, you have the right to perform this music in motion picture theaters here in the United States. So that movie theater does not need to get a performance license for that. You're going to need the rights to exhibit it on TV as well. You're going to need the right to perhaps make a soundtrack. So you're going to need mechanical rights. You're going to need, if you're going to issue it on DVD, you're going to need videogram rights. That's what they call. It's not a mechanical license when you're making audiovisual copies of audiovisual productions. Some people use that term, but mechanical means audio only. For video copies being generated, they call that a videogram license. So depending upon what you're using, what your intended uses are, you're going to need all those rights. And if you don't envision needing them and don't put that in there or don't anticipate future needs and technologies, you're going to be held for ransom. And what happened when, in the early days, when people put things into motion pictures, they just said, hey, we're just going to put it into the production, we're going to exhibit it in theaters, and we're going to maybe show it on TV, because TV was in its infancy, so they knew about that. And then when VHS came along, the rights weren't there, and they didn't have the right to put the movie out in VHS form unless they went back and got rights to do that. And then they were in a very vulnerable bargaining position, because if you had the rights to it, the original song as a publisher, you could ask for whatever you wanted to. Otherwise, they'd have to strip that song out of the motion picture. And maybe it's an important part of it. Maybe it'd be very difficult to do. So people that didn't have the foresight to say we need to be able to exploit this in any way possible, in any media now known or known in the future. If you didn't do that, Disney did that, because Disney had excellent legal representation. So their agreements in 1932 envisioned future technology. But if you didn't do that, there are tons and tons of court cases about whether the language of the agreement allowed these film companies to issue stuff in DVD form or VHS form. All right. What is the fee going to be? Well, there's going to be a lot of factors that are going to affect the fee. If you're using the song as the basis for the movie, like Kenny Rogers the Gambler, did you know that? Speaking, let's have a moment of silence for Kenny. They made a movie out of the plot line, sort of The Gambler. They do that a lot with country songs. They do. They did it with Ode to Billy Joe, which was, here's another recommendation. Watch these things I'm telling you to watch. You're going to love them. Bobby Gentry performing her song, Ode to Billy Joe. Go to YouTube. Watch it immediately. First of all, she's gorgeous. Secondly, she wrote and she was one of the first writer-producer females ever in country music. And it's a really powerful, weird song. And it's got a plot line to it. and it's got such a plot line that they made a movie out of it. Similarly, Toby Keith and Willie Nelson did a song called Beer for My Horses. Yeah, terrible song. Made into an even more terrible movie. So it happens a lot with country. I don't know what else, if there's a non-country version of it. They were going to make a movie. This is one of the movies I was looking forward to more than The Return of Star Wars. They were going to make a movie out of the plot to Skater Boy. Huh? How good would that have been? Skater Boy. I'll see you later, boy. Next thing you know, he's on MTV. So that would cost you a lot. And probably there'd be profit participation by the publisher of that song. If you're using it as the title of the movie, like Pretty Woman or Can't Buy Me Love or any of those, that'll cost you more. If it's a theme song, if it's in the foreground versus the background, if it's in the trailer, you're going to pay more money for that. If there's vocals, how much you're using of the song is going to affect the fee. The stature of the song, obviously, the budget. Publishers do take into account how much budget you have for your music and try to accommodate you. What kind of distribution you have. If you're an indie filmmaker and you want to put a song into your movie, but it hasn't picked up distribution yet, you're just doing festival distribution in order to attract distributors to pick you up. They'll give you a license for just festival distribution. That'd be much cheaper, and then you have to pay more if it ultimately gets picked up. If there's a soundtrack album, that used to affect the price because there were not a lot of soundtrack albums with songs on them before like 1980. If you're using their master, that is, remember, this is for the use of an existing composition that you're going to the publisher for, that if you're going to use the existing recording of the song rather than re-recording the song, then you're going to have to go to the record company. And that's a whole different licensing transaction. The name of that is not a synchronization license. It's a master use license. It's a license to use the master. And unlike the other licenses we've talked about, the licensor is the record company. It's going to cost you about the same as for the composition. Maybe sometimes a little more than the composition for various reasons I won't go into. But if you're going to use their master and it's the same umbrella company as the publisher, they might cut you a break. If you're using, I don't think I put this on here, if you're using a lot of songs, they'll sometimes cut you a break. If you're using more of their songs, they'll cut you a break. How many times you're using it. If it's exclusive, let me talk about exclusivity here for just a second, even though I'm at 27 minutes. My Lord. Most of the licenses we talk about from a publishing point of view are non-exclusive licenses. That is, publishers need to make money by licensing things over and over again. So they are very apprehensive about giving somebody an exclusive license to do something. Exclusive license means you give somebody a license to do something, and now I can't give anybody else the right to do that thing. So most of the licenses we talk about, a mechanical license, is non-exclusive. It has to be, actually, because of the compulsory licensing provisions of the copyright law. But it would be even if that wasn't there. You want as many people to record something as humanly possible. Performance license, obviously not exclusive because I'm licensing the Ryman and I'm licensing NBC and I'm licensing WKRP in Cincinnati. So non-exclusive. Synchronization licenses similarly are generally non-exclusive, but there might be some limited kind of exceptions to that. A limited type of exclusivity that you give someone. So there are instances in the motion picture world where some little bit of exclusivity is given. I can think of a couple of examples. Number one, they've been threatening to do a biopic. They've been threatening to do a biopic of, what's her name, Janis Joplin. And some movie producer really wants to do this. There's a couple of competing productions. One of the productions has paid to have exclusive rights to some of her biggest hits to prevent that other motion picture company. That's costing them a lot to have that option and that exclusivity to do that, but it's preventing that other production from making use of those songs. It's very, very difficult to make the movie without those songs. There was also an example where they were doing a couple of movies about the disco era a number of years ago, and one of the producers of one of the movies tried to, when he selected songs for their particular production, which was focused on the disco era, got some exclusivity with respect to those songs so that the competing production couldn't use it. Now, generally speaking, that exclusivity has a time limit to it, and it's way expensive, so it's very rare that you see it. Mostly these are going to be non-exclusive licenses. For the range, we know we don't like ranges. For most songs, and you're just using a little snippet of a song in a major motion picture, it's going to be $20,000 to $60,000, most. A lot of music supervisors like to go out and discover new artists and people that don't even have record deals, and so they might pay them $2,000, and you'd do it. If they gave you $2,000. You're sitting in O'Brien's publishing class, and you get a little text message, hey, you know what? Somebody wants to use my song in a major motion picture. They're only offering $2,000. O'Brien said $20,000. So you call them up and say, I want 20. They'll say, see you later. I'll see you later, boy. So for indie stuff, non-signed stuff, people with low bargaining power, it could just be a few $1,000s. For somebody, if you're using a really, really prominent song in a prominent way, it could be $100,000 or more, way more, to do something like that. So mechanical royalties, when a producer negotiates for that, sometimes there's so many songs, they ask for a reduced rate. Of course, under those circumstances, if you do, as a publisher, agree that they only have to pay 75% of the statutory rate, you will ask for a most favored nations clause. Do you remember that? Where it says that I will agree to the 75%, but if you pay anybody the full rate, I get the benefit of that full rate. It's called a most favored nations clause. It appears in a lot of circumstances. Videogram license, that is if you're going to put it out on DVD or something like that. I know those days are gone. But for copies like that, there might be just an additional fee that's paid for that. And I'll kick in an additional $5,000 if we release this as a video configuration. It could be that if it's an important use of music or something, it could be, and especially with video games, it will be a percentage royalty that you receive for something like that. And there is this concept of a rollover advance that's very common in videogram licenses and in for video games, for instance. And the way rollover advance works, see if you can stay with me here. Rollover advance is where somebody pays an advance based on a certain number of copies, and as soon as that number of copies is reached, you get another advance based upon an incrementally additional number of copies. So let me just put this in terms. Let's say you agree to a royalty of 10 cents per copy, and then you say, I want an advance based on a sale of 100,000 units of this video game. That would be a $10,000 advance. So you get that $10,000 advance, and they go about selling stuff. And when they reach 100,000 copies, then they have to pay you another $10,000 for the next 100,000 that they're planning on selling. So it keeps rolling over, hence the name rollover advance. All right. The license itself, as I said, is just about 2 pages, and it really just describes specifically and narrowly what the people want to use the song for. Because remember, if you're a grantor of rights, you want always the wording to be as specific and narrow as possible. In case they need more rights, they have to come back to you. So they can't do anything that you didn't envision at the time. So it's really important to make it specific and narrow. There's got to be an obligation on the producer of this production to have a cue sheet accurately filled out. Remember the cue sheet? And that's a little document that describes every use of music within that production that gets sent to the PROs, so that if they notice that something is being shown on TV, they have the information as to what music was in that production. So it's very, very important. Usually specifically describe how credits are going to be handled in their form and manner, in the same type size as everybody else, etc. And you want copies of that production to make sure that they've done it the way they said they were going to do it. All right, my voice is going out, so I'm going to separate TV and commercials out into another lecture, but here you go with this one. And I'm going to show my dog next time. Yes, I am.